Between late 2018 and mid-2019, a heavy suffocating wave of anxiety gripped business owners and wealthy residents across the length and breadth of Zimbabwe. A highly organized, completely ruthless syndicate of armed robbers was moving fluidly across the country, executing a series of high-stakes home invasions, highway ambushes, and daring business raids. These men weren't after petty cash, and they weren't wasting time looking for random home electronics. They operated with a singular, laser-focused appetite for maximum value targets, foreign currency, raw gold, and expensive jewelry. This was not a loose gang or desperate amateurs. This was a hardened crew of seasoned, calculating professionals. 5 of the core masterminds driving this criminal machine were later identified as 37 years old George Munyaradzi Machanyangwa, 29 years old Harmony Nyati, 34 years old Polite Madamombe, 42 years old Titus Mashava, and 34 years old Michael Vioma. What made this specific group incredibly dangerous and an absolute nightmare for law enforcement was their legal background. Every single one of these was actually out on bail for a completely separate string of violent crimes pending before high courts. They knew the police were watching them, and they knew they were facing years behind bars if convicted. But instead of laying low and keeping their heads down, they treated their freedom as a temporary pass to escalate their operations. They completely disregarded their strict court bail conditions to ensure they could move seamlessly through high-end commercial districts without drawing suspicion. Members like Machanyangwa took extreme care with their daily presentation, making sure they looked like successful, wealthy entrepreneurs. Once the sun went down, the sleek exterior vanished. They slipped on tactical face masks, wrecked the slides on their semi-automatic pistols, and went right back to terrorizing the public. Many people expect criminals who get caught and released on bail to keep their heads down, follow the rules, and quietly wait for their trial date. But this crew treated the judicial system like a minor speed bump. They had absolutely zero respect for the law or the communities they were violating. They took their court-ordered freedom immediately, put their masks back on, and launched a multi-city crime spree, violently escalating their tactics with every single raid. The scale of the syndicate's operations was staggering to both the public and detectives. Over a frantic period of less than 10 months, the gang racked up at least 24 heavily documented high-profile cases of armed robbery across completely different provinces. When detectives eventually began auditing the crime scenes, the sheer variety of their haul looked less like a local robbery stash and more like a global currency exchange office. The gang had successfully plundered over 84,000 US dollars in cash, thousands of South African rands, over 30,000 local dollars, 100,000 Mozambican metcash, British pounds, Chinese yuan, and even Dubai dirhams. They were systematically draining the wealth of every businessman they touched. But they didn't just leave a trail of missing money. They left behind a wake of shattered lives and physically traumatized victims. The tipping point for the syndicate arrived during a particularly violent midnight raid at Mabamba complex in the heart of Chitungwiza town center. The gang had breached the security gates and was busy loading their bags when a silent alarm tripped. An active uniformed police officer was the first to react to the emergency broadcast, rushing into the complex alone to protect the local businesses. In most cases, robbers scatter when the police arrive. But this crew chose an entirely different plan. They turned their weapons directly on the uniformed officer and opened fire without hesitation. A bullet tore through the darkness, seriously injuring the officer before the gang made a chaotic rubber-burning getaway into the night. By pulling the trigger on a member of the law enforcement, the syndicate had officially sealed their own fate. They were no longer just high-end thieves. They were public enemy number one. When a criminal gang starts crossing international currency lines and shooting at uniformed police officers in broad daylight, they enter a dark point of no return. They genuinely believe their superior firepower and tactical mass made them completely untouchable by the state. But in reality, wounding that officer in Chitungwiza pulled an absolute hornet's nest down on their heads. From that exact moment, every elite detective in the country stopped what they were doing and began hunting them down. On Wednesday, July 17, 2019, the gang's incredible run of luck completely and violently ran out. Armed with a highly precise, time-sensitive tip-off from a well-placed street informant, elite, armed detectives from the Criminal Investigation Department, the CID, tracked the syndicate's current getaway vehicle straight to the mining city of Kwekwe. It was a warm afternoon. The robbers were casually cruising down the city Mbizo Road, completely unaware that multiple unmarked police vehicles filled with tactical operators were closing the distance, matching their speed and boxing them in from every conceivable angle. The moment the lead detective pulled up ahead and tried to cut off the lane to execute a felony arrest, the gang chose violence one last time. Refusing to go back to a prison cell, they raised their pistols through the windows and opened fire directly on the officers, attempting to blast a bloody path to freedom. But the CID detectives were completely prepared for the resistance. An intense high-speed chase exploded down the crowded tarmac of Mbizo Road. A fierce exchange of heavy gunfire erupted between the moving vehicles, sending pedestrians diving for cover. Bullets shattered glass, ripped through bodywork, and shredded tires as the police returned fire with devastating military precision, turning the public highway into an absolute war zone. When the smoke finally cleared and the screeching tires came to a halt on the blood-stained tarmac of Mbizo Road, the country's most elusive syndicate was completely and utterly broken. The getaway vehicle sat riddled with dozens of bullet holes, its engine smoking, and the ultimate prize of their violent resistance was total, uncompromising defeat. The final ledger of that afternoon shootout was devastating. 4 of the armed robbers died from their catastrophic gunshot wounds right there on the scene, slammed over inside the vehicle. They were later officially identified by forensic teams. The 5th occupant of the car, 34-year-old Michael Vioma, miraculously survived the hail of police gunfire, but sustained severe life-threatening injuries. He was dragged from the wreckage, arrested on the spot, and rushed under heavy armed military guard to a local hospital to be stabilized before facing a lifetime in a maximum security prison. However, the case wasn't completely closed. 2 other heavily compromised accomplices, identified in intelligence reports as Philip Mutasa and a notorious street figure known simply as Sean, managed to use the initial smoke and chaos of the crash to slip away into nearby high-density suburbs. But police records confirmed they didn't get far without a cost. Both men fled the scene carrying severe bleeding gunshot wounds, turning them into marked men across every medical facility in the country. Inside the trunk and footwells of the recovered getaway car, detectives seized 3 semi-automatic pistols, 12 rounds of unspent live ammunition, and a massive hoard of stolen property, completely tying the dead and captured men to the multiple city crime wave that had plagued the nation for months. The violent sudden end of Machanyangwa Syndicate on Mbizo Road sent a massive shockwave straight through the criminal underworld of Zimbabwe. It stands as a graphic, unforgettable reminder of the ultimate, lethal cost of a life built entirely on violence, greed, and deception. The business shop owners and families they once terrorized can finally sleep peacefully through the night, knowing that the weapons used to cause so much pain have been permanently silenced by the law.